We had our first day of pads, which is always a day that it seems like the defense gets pretty fired up as they are finally allowed to hit just a little bit.
Mike Edwards is a ball hawk, period.
Yes.
That's the second day in a row he had a pick.
It's incredible.
The one a couple days ago, he really paid for it because it was a leaping one, and he landed on the ground really hard. Did you see that? I think he got the air knocked out of him.
I think
it was
so,
fine,
too.
But it took him a while to get him off the field.
The percentage of interceptions to snaps he plays.
I looked it up.
Perfect. That was what I was hoping was going to happen. Tell me this stat. I'm going to love this stat.
Counting the playoffs last year, he was on the field for 320 defensive snaps and had 3 interceptions. So about one snap every 106, one interception every 106 snaps. Nobody else on the team was even close. The next closest one was almost 3 times as many snaps per interception.
Unbelievable.
So guys like, and that's not to sell somebody like Carlton Davis Short, who had 4 interceptions, but he also had like 1,300 snaps.
Right. That's incredible.
He
What a
finds the ball,
stat.
Mike Edwards
He does. It's just unbelievable. So as we mentioned, it was the first day of pads, which is always an exciting one because, again, we've had to say so many things to answer all of your questions about it's hard to tell. It's hard to tell.
Yeah.
It's hard to tell when there aren't pads on. That it's just wide receivers. Some of those guys we can tell some fun things,
Yes,
but
100%.
particularly for the big men.
Yep.
Once there are pads on, we can finally get a sense of some things. Of course, preseason games will help a lot more, but pads at least start having you have some drills like one-on-ones with offensive and defensive linemen, and it really just gives us a clearer picture of the team overall. So what were some things that you felt like you learned from that day?
Well, what Coach called it, first of all, we had a good practice yesterday, according to Coach, after Friday's practice, which he was really, really not happy with. And that was good not only because it showed they could bounce back, and as Ali Marpet said, as long as you're trending in the right direction overall, you can have some ups and downs during camp, and he feels they are. But it was also the first day of pads, as you said, and that brought what Coach calls more noise to practice. And I don't think he means the occasional times when pads hit pads and get that cracking sound. I think he means noise kind of like a radio type term, like chaos, contact, more heat in the pads, just more things for a player to deal with. And he said when there's noise, the real football players show up. Some guys look great in shorts, and then when you put on the pads, they don't do as well with all the noise. So the fact that the Buccaneers as a whole did well is a good sign.
And just a reminder, we will be taking your Facebook questions in the final segment here. So if you have a question for us, put it in the comment section underneath our live video on Facebook, and we'll get to those at the end there. So tell me a little bit about, especially one-on-ones. We always love those. Was there anything that came out of that drill that we noticed?
That was the first thing I wanted to see as soon as the pads went on. It was the one-on-one drills with the offensive lineman and defensive lineman. Because as you were alluding to earlier, we've been saying, well, we can't tell you how well Joe Tryon is doing or somebody like that, because those guys don't really get a chance to show up until they're actually hitting with each other. And, an offensive lineman trying to keep them at bay and the defensive lineman trying to get around them. And so the first one-on-one at camp was yesterday. It was right there. It probably will be again today. It was very spirited, and you really did see some things. For instance, everybody's talking very highly of Robert Hainsey, as they should, but the very first couple one-on-one snaps with pads that this guy got in the NFL was one-on-one directly with Vita Vea. That's not a very nice way to be introduced into pads
what
in
a
the NFL.
first day.
That Vita Vea's bull rush is just insane. So here's Robert Hainsey learning the center position, as he was talking about having to have his feet parallel instead of staggered, have to get the snap off first, and then he's got to try to stop Vita Vea, and you're not going to win that a lot.
Not a job I want, that's
and then
for sure.
I did see JPP looking like he's in mid-season form with one just incredible speed rush around the end where the tackle didn't even get a hand on him. And then Joe Tryon looked pretty good too. So, there was a lot of good for the defense in that one, I think.
And I think it was you mentioned how Bruce talked about it being a spirited practice and some extra noise. I mean, first of all, I know that it was spirited with some trash talk going on, that guys were getting each other amped up, fired up, which is always great to see. That training camp can start to get pretty repetitive. It can get a little rough. It's hot out here, and man, there was no lack of competitiveness between offensive defense, guys starting to get in each other's faces, but all very, very lovingly, which I also enjoy a lot. So, but the noise that I know Bruce was talking about wasn't necessarily just the noise of trash talk between them, that there was a little bit more to it than that. So tell us a little bit about what Bruce was talking about there and what you feel like that's going to mean for this team.
I didn't understand the question.
Sorry, when you talked about him with the noise that he mentioned and the energy of practice when he spoke about that in his press conference.
Well, it's just what you want to see. It was a good practice overall. One of the battles that was going on, you were talking about guys trash talking with each other, and I was talking about one-on-one battles. But another battle that's going on for a lot of these players every day is player versus heat, and with the pads on, it's even worse. And strangely enough, Ali Marpet actually seems to get some enjoyment out of battling through the heat. He was talking about yesterday that in a weird way, it's kind of fun. You got the devil on your shoulder telling you, you got to quit, this is too much. And to push through that, he says that's the fun part of it. It's a different sort of definition of fun than I would have. But I guess you got to find a way to keep yourself motivated, right?
Right, absolutely. And, we talked about JPP, Joe Tryon, and what we saw from them in some of those one-on-one drills. We've had a lot of questions about, we know starters are locked up in so many positions, but who's going to be the starter isn't always as important as snap counts overall. So what are we starting to learn about maybe what some of those snap counts could look like, particularly for the outside linebacker position?
It was good that Joe Tryon had a good day yesterday and has been performing well overall, because I know the team would really like to see him work pretty prominently into the rotation. If you look here right now, these are all of the outside linebacker snaps, that's edge rusher essentially, that the Buccaneers had last year. And as you'll see, Cam Gill really only 35, and this counts the playouts too. So you can almost count Cam Gill out. It was a three-man rotation where JPP is still playing 88% of the snaps and Shaq 84, and that's a lot. That's more than a lot of the edge rushers around the league would play. So if you can keep Anthony Nelson and maybe Cam Gill in there, but add in Joe Tryon, you could probably get some of those snap counts down a little bit for JPP and Shaq Barrett. Now, the question is, will they allow that? Because JPP doesn't like to come off the field.
No, he does not.
But I think there's a pretty good theory that if you can get those guys' snap counts down to, say, maybe 75%, which is still 3/4 of the plays, that they'll be more effective for a full 60 minutes. And you know it's at the end of the game when you really want your pass rush to be on.
Well, and again, 17-game season.
That's right.
Of all times, you maybe want to give your guys a little bit of a rest. That as 100%. Much as, again, we know they don't want to come off the field, you got that extra game. And I think that especially when you are a team that is looking to hopefully get all the way back to the Super Bowl, that is a lot of games over the course of a season where, I think that we're going to see a huge benefit to any little bit of rest you can get a guy, even if it's just a few snaps here and there. That could really end up paying off at the end of the season. So, yeah, I think that's going to be really important. And then, of course, we saw the sacks on there. I want to hear for you, who do you think the sack leader is going to be this year if you had to put money on it?
Well, I think I was asked that question in one of these shows a few days ago, and my answer was Shaq Barrett, and I even had a number, 13.5. So I think he's just really highly motivated this year. I mean, he got that new contract, but I don't think you have to worry about him being one of those supposed, I don't think it really happens that often, but the guy gets the big contract and doesn't show up because he's already made it. I think it's going to be the other way with Shaq. He seems determined to prove that he's worth every penny.
I like that. I think that's going to be true. All right, we are going to show you some of the highlights from yesterday's practice. And, of course, don't forget we're taking your Facebook Live questions at the end of this show. So leave those in the comment section underneath the Facebook Live video. For right now, let's check out those highlights. Welcome back to Training Camp Live. Casey Phillips here with senior writer and editor Scott Smith. And just a reminder, we'll be taking your Facebook questions in our final segment here. And we are back, as always, to show you as many live look-ins to practice as we can, talk about some of the big topics of the team. And I know running backs is one that we have loved talking about even leading up to camp, and now finally getting to see a little bit of that in action, because it is one of the few positions where there is still some stuff up in the air in terms of who you consider a starter, how the snaps are going to be distributed, what that's going to look like, and especially with a new guy like Giovanni Bernard coming in here, who is such a third down specialist kind of running back. And so I know Coach had really harped on catching the ball. That was something even last year, especially with the running backs in training camp, I remember was a big discussion of there were a few more drops than he would have liked to see. There's been a little bit of that already so far this training camp across the board, that Coach said there were a few more drops than he'd like to see happening. So how have you been seeing the evolution of the running backs in particular and the way they could be used in the passing game and how they've looked in training camp so far?
Yeah, well, the interesting thing about those drops is that they actually haven't really extended to the running backs. The other day when Coach was upset and saying, I don't know if I saw a wide receiver catch a pass the entire practice, which was hyperbole, of course, but he was getting his point across. He said at the same time that actually the running backs were catching the ball fine. It's like, not the receivers and tight ends today, but all camp the running backs have been catching the ball. really well. And he specifically pointed to Ronald Jones and Leonard Fournette in that discussion because he knows those are the two guys that people have questions about. Nobody really has questions about Giovanni Bernard's pass catching ability because over the last 8 years, I think he's maybe third in the league amongst running backs in pass catches. Wow. And so the reason we talk about this a lot is because, in not this one, but the one before March, the Buccaneers signed that Tom Brady guy. Which you may or may not recall.
Yeah.
And from that point on, everybody talked about how in New England, he liked to throw the running ball, the football to the running back slot. That was partially because he didn't have this array of weapons that he has here. I think he's felt just fine throwing the ball to Mike Evans and Rob Gronkowski and Chris Godwin and so on. But you still maybe would like to see a little bit more of that running back in the passing game be part of the attack. At least have that option to to mix things up a little bit. And Leonard Fournette was pretty decent at it last year. But Giovanni Bernard could carve out a role, not only in third downs, but somebody pointed this out a couple days ago, and I hadn't thought about it. Third downs, yes, but also,
a little bit of
but also 2-minute drills. Oftentimes in a 2-minute drill, you leave one back on the field, and you're not going to hand it off to him almost at any time. But he's got to be able to pass protect, and he's got to be able to catch those dump-off passes when the defense is laying back. And I think that's a role that Giovanni Bernard could fit into in 2-minute drills. So we'll see how that works out. But the question is, if the Bucs were to find a James White type player, who's it going to be? And I think we can look at this graphic here to look at all these guys and compare them to what James White did. So the first column there is their targets per game. So 5.4 for James White, and then the yards that they get per target. And as you can see, those are good numbers for James White. Now look at the other guys that could fill that role, Fournette or Jones or Bernard. I didn't put Keyshawn Vaughn up here because it wouldn't have been fair. He didn't have a lot of snaps or catches last year. Leonard Fournette, you see, has had the most targets, a lot more than Ronald Jones, almost twice as much, but they get about the same amount of yards when they are targeted. But then you have Giovanni Bernard, who, quite honestly, I thought his targets per game would be higher, but his yards per target is the one that most closely resembles James White. So to me, it's probably Fournette or Bernard, and it's kind of a volume thing.
Yeah, and you had mentioned in an earlier show, I think, about what Gio's stats are in third downs, that he averages something like 9 yards per catch when he's targeted on
I don't recall
third
that, but
down.
that makes sense.
Yeah, I think you mentioned something about how many yards he was getting when he was catching on that. You come up with so many numbers, it really is incredible how important that would be on a third down. And I think about that's the case for so many of the guys on this team that they average so many yards on that third down. The efficiency they have shown when they're targeted on third down. Yeah, the receivers, Mike Evans. Yeah, maybe it was Mike Evans that you mentioned that about. But I was thinking about just how incredible it is that these guys who are being asked to serve large third down roles, they don't just barely get it a lot of times, that they are going above and beyond in that scenario, and how nice that's got to feel for Tom Brady and for this offense to know you have guys who can not only get you the first down, but then some.
Well, in different ways. Like I think with Mike Evans, his average depth of target is so deep that he usually catches the ball already past the sticks. But we saw several plays last year where Chris Godwin had to fight for the extra yards to get what he needed on third down. I can think of a couple off the top of my head. So you got a couple different ways of getting that third down accomplished.
Well, and when we were talking about Bruce Arians last year and this offense and what it was going to look like, and everybody loves to emphasize the no risk it, no biscuit, and thinking that it was just going to be bombs every time down the field. And I think people wondered how much the run game was going to still be employed. So now that we saw last year a largely similar personnel to what we have on the team this year, what did you learn about the way he really does like to split it between those long bombs, between still using receivers, tight ends, and then also going to the run game? What did we learn about that, and how similar or different do you think it'll be this year?
Well, I think I think Bruce Arians would like to get a little bit more balance between the rush and the pass. The Bucs were fairly low in the league in terms of runs, the percentage of their overall snaps on offense that are runs. I think it was only like maybe 37%, which was in the bottom 5 in the league. And I think you'd like to see that number come up a little bit. And you actually did see that towards the end of the year. The last couple weeks of the regular season and then in the postseason, it was a lot closer to a 50-50 split between the run and the pass. And I think the offense operates best when that's the case. Here's the thing about the running game in Bruce Arians. I don't think he's ever going to look at the overall numbers. Like if the Bucs rank 28th in the league at 97 yards per game or something, that's not going to bother him as long as he feels like the running game is overall efficient when he needs it to be. And that gives you that, as he says, there's some disagreement over how much this is true, but Bruce definitely believes that an efficient running game really puts a lot more juice in the play action pass. And play action, if you can get your play action working well, that's one of the most effective ways to pass the ball in the NFL.
So now with Giovanni Bernard being here, how much do you think the running back situation will look different of how often running backs in general are used, and the way that this is potentially going to change, especially third down, what you asked tight ends, wide receivers, everybody? Who do you think Giovanni maybe takes some snaps away from, some targets away from? Does he just slide into where that role already was last year, but maybe just is able to be a little bit more efficient with it? How does that change things?
Well, that's going to be up to him and how effective he is compared to the other running backs. If he and Leonard Fournette are giving you the same sort of thing, it seems like early on third downs, then maybe you don't need to take snaps away from Leonard Fournette on third down if he's doing just as well as Giovanni Bernard would do. So we just have to see how effective Bernard is early on, and then we'll probably see how the snaps and the targets are distributed. But I don't think that's an answer that we're going to have by week 1 or week 2. I think that's going to be something that develops a little bit along the way.
Yeah, how do you think that's going to look in preseason? We've talked about the quarterback situation in preseason and who you play and how, and especially now that there's only 3 games. I'd love to hear that about the running backs in your mind, of how much are we going to see different guys? How much is it going to be about your developmental or younger guys? How many different people are you thinking that you're going to see preseason, the number of snaps, the number of games? What's that going to look like?
Well, I think a guy that could get a lot of action in the preseason is Keyshawn Vaughn. Because I don't think the Buccaneers need to find anything out about Fournette or Jones. Are you really, if they're playing a lot in the preseason, is that really the competition that's going to decide who gets the most snaps? I don't think so. I think it's going to be something that develops along the way. It starts out sort of as a timeshare, and then if one of or other of them gets hot, then maybe they take a larger share. But you do need to find more stuff about Keyshawn Vaughn, including how good is he in pass protection, how well does he play on special teams, how does he catch the ball, because they already feel good about his running. So I think you could see a lot of Keyshawn Vaughn and Giovanni Bernard.
Okay, all right, we are going to take a quick break here, and in our final segment, we will get to your Facebook questions. So again, if you have a question for us, leave it underneath our live video on Facebook. And again, right now, we are going to meet another one of the rookies. Here is Jalen Darden.
I definitely think the Bucs got a steal out of me. For sure, I'm a hard worker. Kind of love to soak in knowledge from other guys, and being around Antonio Brown, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Scotty Miller, those guys, to really be able to sit down and soak in the game, because I'm the young pup, so I'm definitely trying to come in and learn as much as I can. I honestly don't have a role yet. I have to go in there and kind of find my niche and find my role. The coach is always telling me just be myself, because that's what got me here. So I'm more so going to keep that approach and just turn it up a notch. For sure, I'm going to be helping on special teams, but I'm in a big veteran room, so I definitely will have to sit down and wait my turn, and I'm willing to do that. As far as getting drafted, coming from where I come from, not too many people get the opportunity, so that definitely was the biggest one. And then also being able to continue to make my dad proud, knowing that he's not here with me, and I don't have a father figure to lean on right now at the time, so that's kind of just the hardest part. But, well, I've been dealing with adversity my whole life, having to move from households, my mom not being able to keep up with the bills and things of that nature. So, I mean, it's kind of, if anything, God already kind of prepared me for the situation. It's more so how I'm going to handle it now. From anything with learning it, it's just keeping my head forward and keep progressing and getting better each and every day, trying to be a better me. Honestly, like, he'll just be crying, just saying that I did it. He happy for me. He happy that I kept going and I never quit. It was times that I did want to quit football because of not being able to take care of my family and be able to be with my dad as much as I could. But at the end of the day, he told me to keep going, because when we start something, we don't quit. So that's more so how I just looked at it, and now I just got to keep pushing. So everything I do on the field and off the field is really for him. Definitely coming to get a hard worker, very energetic, likes to be around people, always has a smile. First one to come in the building, the last one to leave, definitely. All I can say is I'm gonna give y'all 110%.
Welcome back into training camp live. Casey Phillips here with senior writer and editor Scott Smith, and we are in our final segment, which means it's time to take your Facebook questions. If you have one of those, this is our last chance to get it in there for today's show. Leave it underneath our live video, and I know we just had that video about meeting Jalen Darden, and while we were in break with that rolling, he was fielding a punt, and so I know that's going to be one of the big roles he could play. You can see him talking to Jason Light there, getting a little attaboy on the back as
That's always good.
That's always a good sign as he goes out there. So, all right, our first fan question is from Justin. Anything to report on Kyle Trask? How is he looking? And then, of course, I will add on, when will we know more about how he's looking?
It's been a quiet camp. For Kyle, I don't think there's been much to report on. I guess that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, there certainly hasn't been any reason to wring our hands about him. As Coach said again the other day, it's the same thing he said during the mini camp. He's taking it slow because he can. He's processing the information very deliberately and putting it all together deliberately. I'll say the same word twice, but he's not counted on this year. He's probably not going to be needed, barring some pretty serious injury problems. So he could take it slow like that, and the team's fine with that. So I don't know if we're going to have big glowing reports to talk about, but when we are going to find out more about him is in the preseason games, which he should probably see a lot of action in those.
Right, and I know we talked a little bit about this earlier in the show, but I know not everybody gets to be here for the whole show, so we had a couple different questions about, someone brought up that they had asked you earlier this week about Joe Tryon, and that you had said we'd know more Saturday because of the Pads Day, and now we've had that Pads Day. So what did we feel like we learned about him and how he could look in that rotation?
Yeah, he certainly looked competitive in that one-on-ones. He's fast, he's quick, and he still looked quick even when the pads went on. He had a couple notable plays during the full team drills because now they're doing, this is more like a real pass rush now. They still have to stay away from the quarterback. That's rule number one. But he had some notable edge rushes during that drill. So I thought it was a good first day for him. He felt so afterwards when he was talking to the press. He thought it was a real nice step for him. And think about this. It's the first time this guy has put on pads since December of 2019. Because he opted out last year. So it's been a long wait for him, and he was clearly very excited to be back to this stage of football.
And then we had a question from Daniel. He said, I was very impressed with our O-line size and their still great footwork. Do you think that is underrated about this team?
I do think that the Bucs under Jason Light and Bruce Arians have, and even before Bruce Arians got here, have targeted kind of bigger offensive linemen. I think it's a big line. I mean, Donovan Smith is maybe 330. Ali Marpet is very big.
They're all very large.
They're large people. Tristan Wirfs. I think that they deliberately have tried to build a big but still athletic offensive line.
Yes.
One thing about the offensive line, Ali was talking yesterday. He thinks this is the best depth they've had at guard since he's been here, which is about 6 years. It's true that often you don't have a whole lot of depth on the offensive line, and it's not experienced depth at the moment, which you'd prefer to have both experience and talent there. But oftentimes, your depth on the D line is younger guys, some of them sometimes even undrafted. And Ali pointed to John Molchon and Nick Leverett and the rookie Sedarius Hutcherson and said they're all killing it right now.
That's amazing. Yeah, they did look good in one-on-ones, and there is a lot of depth there. And they are, to that question, they're huge, and they seem to just be doing a great job in terms of their footwork and their athleticism. They're not just big bodies, that they do have the technical side to go with it. Eddie brought up the idea of, now that you've won the Super Bowl and there's a lot more hype and a lot more media and all these primetime games, what does that kind of do to this team? What does that change about things? And what are some of the things that maybe Coach would want to do or focus on to help make sure that doesn't change anything?
Well, when you talk about maybe distractions because there's so much attention on the team now, they really went through that last year because of Tom Brady, right? I mean, Tom Brady got us, before we'd even won anything, 5 scheduled primetime games, and that's what we have again this year. So I think they've already probably had a chance to adjust to being in the spotlight. The difference this year is that, as several players have said the same thing, everybody's going to be gunning for the Bucs now. I mean, that's a game you circle on your calendar if you're any other team. Everybody wants to take down the champion, and so they expect to get every team's number one best effort every time. And so, the Bucs are going to have to bring their best effort every single week as well.
And then I'm sure I'm going to butcher this. Eliezer, I think.
Eliezer?
Something like that. Said, which rookie or new player has impressed you the most?
Well, Joe Tryon was good yesterday, as we were talking about. We really haven't seen a lot of the 2 linebackers, I don't think. Chris Wilcox hasn't played yet. Did he say rookie or newcomer?
Yeah, anybody that's a new addition to the team.
Okay. One guy, and I brought him up a couple days ago, that you wouldn't necessarily think of, is a guy he's a veteran, just a couple years in. He's seen a little bit of action with a couple different teams, including the Dolphins, is cornerback Nate Brooks, number 38. He just seems to make a lot of plays on the ball. And, he's still in a battle for maybe a 5th or 6th quarterback spot, but he's shown up pretty well.
And I know I also saw Antonio Hamilton made an interception
He had a pick yesterday.
Yeah. So I thought that was a pretty good play. And it was a good one. It was not a gimme. He got up
jumped
there
around.
for it. Yeah. So I thought that was pretty great.
And he's known to be good on special teams, so I think he's got a real shot.
I've lost the name of who asked this, but someone asked about the idea of running backs and how much their ability to catch the ball will affect who starts, who gets the reps, all of that in terms of, we've talked so much about Rojo or Fournette in their running ability, but how much do you think their ability to catch the ball will factor in who's considered the quote-unquote starter or getting more snaps?
Well, the thing about it is they all are catching the ball just fine right now, so I think the team is becoming confident that whichever one they got in there is going to catch the ball if they're thrown to them. But there's more to it than that, of course. Some running backs run routes better than other ones. Some of them just catch swing passes and make more yards out of that. But some of them you can split them wide or whatever. You can run them on actual routes like a receiver would run. And that obviously adds a new dimension than just a running back who catches screen passes or swing passes. So I think the one who shows that he could do that and bring another dimension to the passing game would be the one you'd be most likely to see on third downs.
And Paul had asked, he said, I think special teams was a bit of a weakness last year. How improved do you think they will be this year with the players that we added? And who do you think could play some of those big new roles there this year?
Well, special teams was a weakness in a couple areas, not across the board. The kicking game was good, obviously. It was very good with Ryan Suckup. The kickoffs were good with Bradley Pinion. And the return game was solid, if not spectacular. Where the Bucs struggled was in coverage, especially on kickoff coverage. But, I think we only had 13 of them all year to cover because we get so many touchbacks. But that's the area that the Bucs need to improve this year is in kick and punt coverage. And they did draft guys that they thought could step right in on special teams, including the two linebackers, KJ Britt and Grant Stewart, the cornerback, Chris Wilcox, who hasn't played yet, but has the perfect size-speed combination to be a stud on special teams. So those three guys in particular would be expected to have special teams roles if they make the 53-man roster.
Okay, and we'll close with this. Jermaine said, how many Pro Bowlers do you think we will have this year?
Well, more than one, I'd bet, which is what we had last year, which tied for the fewest that any Super Bowl champion has ever had, if you believe that. Jason Pierre-Paul was apparently our only Pro Bowler. We didn't have any All-Pros either, so I don't know how we won the Super Bowl. But that postseason run certainly brought the spotlight on a couple players that are burgeoning stars for the Buccaneers, like Devon White. I've kind of given up hope that Levante David's going to get his due. Only one Pro Bowl when he probably should have made it in maybe 7 of his 8 years or 8 of his 9 years so far. But you never know. The question is, do guys like Ali Marpet, it's hard for offensive linemen to break through. The same guys seem to make it every year. So can a deserving guy like Ali Marpet or Ryan Jensen make it? We'll see. Our receivers are always a possibility, right? Just depends on how much they have to split up the numbers. And then there's Tom Brady. So it could be, and then Shaq Barrett, JPP, guys that have already been there. You could see anywhere from 2 or 3 to 6 or 7, but it's a little hard to call right now.
All right, well, that's going to do it for us on this edition of Training Camp Live. Thanks for being with us. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more live look-ins to practice, taking your Facebook questions. Here's a schedule of all the days that we are coming to you live, so we'll be back here tomorrow morning. See you then.